Good morning. Today is the 14th of Kislev, the 27th, I believe, of November. And we're continuing with Mitzvah's Tzitz in Derech Mitzvotecha. We're on page 15, and we're at the very bottom. And what we're discussing now is levels of reward and punishment. And we said that when Adam first came into the world, he was at such a level, at such a conscious level, that it was like he was living in the world of emanation. And then after he sinned, his consciousness fell down into a much lower realm. And then what happened was, because of that, after the soul departs from the world, it is freed from the lower levels of consciousness, and then it enters what we call the Garden of Eden, which was the original state in which Adam was when he was created. And we consider those levels to be reward and punishment for us. Meaning, especially reward, in terms of the level of experience of godliness that you can reach. So in the place where we are now, the level is very low. And yesterday I called it, I think this word is very nice, enchantment. It's being able to recognize the mystery of God within reality. And this way you have many, many levels in Gan Eden itself. There are many different levels that the soul can progress to. And what is common to them all is that there's greater and greater experience or revelation of godliness, and this we call that the tzaddik basks in the light of the Shekhinah. That's how it's described in the sages. Uvezei uvan, so we're at the very, very end. Right? Last few words. וזה הובן עניין 50,000 יובלות. Very interesting. So, there's a concept that comes from Kabbalah, from where exactly in Kabbalah it is. I hesitate to say, I'm going to say it's Sefer Tmuna, but I'm not sure 100%. And it has this concept which follows the idea of the Jubilee. Now, there are two competing ideas, competing not in the sense that it's either one or the other, meaning that they fought between them, that there were two schools of thought, but rather that they compete in terms of their opposites. But they sound very similar. One is the concept of Shemitot. Shemitot means sabbatical years. That's one concept. The other concept is the Jubilees. And they're actually the opposite from one another. How does it work? Shemitot, sabbatical years, is from Sefer Tmuna 100%. That's where it's from. It's an early Kabbalah book that is attributed to Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana. And there it says that our reality, the reality that we are in, about which the sages said that the time span of this reality is 6,000 years, plus 1,000 more, is the second series of 7,000 such years. Okay. And so, what's the idea? The idea is that, like in the Jubilee in the Torah, what's the Jubilee? Jubilee is the 50th year. So the Torah says you should count 6 years, and then 7th year is the sabbatical. You can't work the land. So you do this 7 times, and then the 50th year is also a sabbatical year. So you get 2 sabbatical years in a row. So comes Sefer Tmuna and says, what is this all about? It's saying that really the reality that we know of 7,000 years is like a sabbatical. It's 6 plus 1, or instead of 6 plus 1, we'll say 6,000 plus 1,000. But it's really the second one. This 7,000, this span of 7,000 years that we are in, is really the second such span. What came before it? There was another span of 7,000 years before it. What's he talking about? What does he mean? So, the early Kabbalists took this, not literally, but they took the metaphor to its logical conclusion. And they said, just as there was 7,000 years before this 7,000 years, there will be 5 more spans of 7,000 years until we come to the Great Jubilee. And how do they explain it? They say the 7,000 years before us, they are chesed. The 7,000 years we are in is gvura, or din, meaning might, or judgment. And the next 7,000 years is going to be tiferet, it's going to be beauty, and so on until you reach, and finally, the last span of 7,000 years, that's kingdom, and that is when God's kingdom will be revealed on earth. So, you ever heard of this idea? You've heard of it. You must have heard of it, because if you learn Chasidus, you see it. It's even in Torah or. But there he says, but the Arizal didn't accept this. What did the Arizal say? The Arizal said, this is all very, very metaphoric. It's figurative. And what it means to say is what I call the world of the shattered vessels, the world of chaos, olam hatov. That is what they meant by the previous 7,000 years. Our reality is the only reality. It's these 7,000 years. Okay? And then, after that, it's entirely something different. It's not more years. You can't look at it that way. It's something entirely different. What is it exactly? I have to tell you this. I don't think anybody ever explained. So Arizal leaves it like that. It's not about years at all. It's not about talking about years. So when the Alter Rebbe quotes this, he says, for instance, what's an example of this? What do you use this for? So he says, Moshe Rabbeinu's, his soul came from the previous 7,000 years. Meaning his soul is from the world of Tohu. From the world of Tohu.
I thought it was the world of Chesed.
It's Chesed, but it's Tohu.
Okay.
So, it's not, Tohu is not necessarily might. Tohu is something different.
Yeah.
Why Chesed? Very simply because the vessels broke. And when you talk about a state of Chesed, Chesed is like overflowing abundance. It didn't just overflow, it completely spilled all over because the vessels were broken.
So
that's the metaphor.
Okay.
That's how he explains it.
Yeah.
In any case, and Moshe Rabbeinu's soul doesn't come from our world. He doesn't really understand this world. And there's a lot of Chassidus about this. In the famous thing called Ramah Chotiyot, the 248 sections. That was like an inner document that was passed in Tomchei Tmimim, in Lubavitch. So there's a statement there about who understood this world and who didn't understand this world. It says very clear that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand this world. He didn't get this world. Why? Because he's from a different place. He just doesn't understand how this world works. And so, even as a child, he has to have some angel move his hand, according to the Medrash. The Medrash is trying to say he doesn't have the common sense. And so he goes straight for the gold, whereas every kid would have gone for the for the embers, for the fire, and because of that, he's because he thought it was gold.
Yeah.
What?
He went for the fire.
No, he went for the gold, and then the angel had to move his hand, and so he took from the embers, and because he thought he was taking from the gold. The gold is interesting to put into your mouth. The embers not so much. In any case, that's one concept. And so what do you have here? You have here not an ascent, but rather a descent. That's the way it's understood. That Chesed is the highest. That was the best possible Shemitot. They're called Shemitot, sabbatical years. And as you progress, you're going lower and lower, because that's how the Sfirot are, right? Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, you keep going down until finally the divine light, God's revelation, reaches the lowest reaches of reality. It permeates all of reality, and in the last 7,000 years, you get God's kingdom on earth. That's that description. So it's a descent of the light. But there is, like I said, a competing idea which goes in the opposite direction. It's called Chamishim Alfei Yovlot, 50,000 Jubilees. And so where this finished, we finished with the Jubilee year after 50,000 years, right? We have finally a Jubilee year, because every year here is 1,000. So now there's this concept of 50,000 Jubilees. Meaning, what the Torah talks about the 50th year is a Jubilee. Now we're going to turn it into 50,000 Jubilees. Not just, meaning, you can imagine how many years that is. Again, obviously this is metaphoric. What is it talking about, he says? A completely different direction. The ascent, not the descent of God's revelation, but rather the ascent of man. And here, Kishnat Hashvit Shabbat LaHashem Aliyot HaOlamot. בתחילת השמיטה השנייה כסוף הראשונה, ושנת השביעית שהוא אלף השביעי שלה בעילוי יותר. So here we have a different concept, that each Shemitah is a higher level of man. Why? Because we've worked for 6 years, then the 7th year we are on sabbatical. It's like on Shabbos, you're at a higher level. And just like Shabbos is described in the Arizal as an ascent of the worlds, going back towards the state of Adam Arishon, of Adam in the Garden of Eden. So on Shabbos you get a little bit of a taste of it, especially Shaloshidus. Shaloshidus, Rava de Ravin, the will of the wills, that's the time when you mamish can feel Gan Eden. So, just as this happens in every cycle of 7 years, that the sabbatical year is higher in terms of the human experience, not how much God has permeated, but how much we've elevated back to our original state, there are 50,000 jubilees of such levels of ascent. So this is a concept that appears in the early Kabbalah works. And so he says, what is this talking about? This again is about the ascent of man, not the descent of, not the permeation of divinity into reality, but rather the ascent of man. And so there's 50,000 jubilees, and these are all levels, and he says this is the system you have to know in order to think about levels of ascent of the soul as it returns back to its state before it came down into this world. And the reason they use this wild number, 50,000 jubilees, so this is 50,000 times 50. It's actually not that much. It's 2,500 times 1,000. So it's 2,500,000. It's not that much. Today we're not impressed by these numbers because we know people that have 2,500,000 shekels, dollars, gold bullion, whatever. We know people like that, so it's not so impressive. But back then it was very impressive. And so now, what is this all talking about? This is all on the ascent of the soul in rewards. So it's getting reward, getting reward, and it until you reach the highest level, which is like Adam in the Garden of Eden. כל זה בבחינת הארת האלוקות המתלבשת בפנימיות, שהולכת ומצטמצמת כפי ירידת העולמות, ובה יהיה העליות ממטה למעלה. And now he says, it's also tied a little bit into the idea that godliness continues to descend. So he says one's going down, one's coming up. This is how the Shmitas and the 50,000 Jubilees connect, because as God's light is permeating further into reality, man is able to ascend. That's another way of looking at it. ובלשון הקבלה נקרא גילוי זה בשם קו וחוט, הנמשך מאינסוף ברוך הוא בעכו והאצילות. And when you ask, what is all this called in Kabbalah, really Kabbalah, in Rabbi Isaac Luria's, in the Arizal's Kabbalah, he says there it's called the line and the thread of infinite light that is coming down, and as it comes down and permeates reality, it creates world after world after world, and the idea is that man is ascending through this line as divinity is coming down, as God's revelation is coming down, man is ascending up. Okay. All this was about, you already know, inner light, interior light, the light that integrates into the person. Because what do we mean that you perceive divinity? It means that you perceive, like in the same way that I perceive that there's paper here. I have to be aware of it. So this is talking about what we call inner light. This is all about what my vessels can integrate into themselves. So there's 50,000 times 50 levels that I can integrate into myself of divine revelation. But from the other type of light that we talk about, the other type of God's revelation, which we call the makif, the surrounding light, which does not enclose itself in the inner essence of the creatures, of the creations, and rather it encircles them, it encompasses them. That type of light is equal, it's entirely egalitarian for all creatures. There is no ascent or descent, there's no perceiving more, perceiving less. It's all the same everywhere. Why did he do this? He did this to stress how different they are. That in the inner integrated light, you have 50 times 50,000 levels of ascent. Okay? And again, it's because of the 7,000 times 7 Shemitot, sabbatical years, God's light is coming down. That's like the line and the thread. But in the encompassing light, everyone is equal. Even the people that perceive the 50 times 50,000 level, when it comes to the encompassing light, they and the person who's at the first level have the same level of perception. There's no difference. This is a completely egalitarian force. We've talked about this many times, about the difference between them. And how this is all the same. This is a very important principle, because people are like, should we have democracy or should we have dictatorship? Which one is better? Is it better to make everyone equal, or is it better that there's a hierarchy with someone atop? So the Torah says there's both. There's both. In fact, if you would build a monarchical Jewish kingdom today, you would have both, because that's the way it was also in King David's time. On the one hand, he's a king. He's the top of the hierarchy. He's at the top of the hill. On the other hand, all Jews are equal. So he has this makes us equal. So he's got this very complex system that he has to take care of. Meaning, you have to have both. You know, in truth, every modern democracy in a certain sense accepts this. How do they accept this? They say, on the one hand, there's a hierarchy here. There are people who are running the show and people who are being run. On the other hand, everybody's supposed to be equal in the eyes of the law. The law is supposed to be the great equalizer. Right. But by us, it's not just the law. If you take the law as a Torah, maybe, but that's not even it, because Torah says different things for Kohanim, different things for Levim, different things for Yisrael. It's not exactly the great equalizer. That's what it means. What we mean is in the eyes of God. In the eyes of God, and here when we say the eyes of God, what do we mean? We mean the encompassing light. And it's described also as God is seeing everything in one glance. Adam Kadmon, which here is like God, it surveys everything all at once in one glance. How can you do that? Only if everything is equal in your eyes. But if you don't feel that everything is equal, then you're talking about inner light, and inner light is hierarchical. Now, how can we perceive this? So for years I've been trying to explain how we can perceive this. Right? So the best way to perceive it is to look into a mirror. When you look into a mirror, you lose your special perspective. Let me explain this in 1 minute. The reason that we find it very difficult to break away from a hierarchical view of reality is because we put ourselves in the center of reality. We all do. Every single person. If you don't, you're sick. It means you don't have an ego and you can't function. Right. You have to have this feeling that you're the center of the universe. Of course, Yaakov is also the center of your universe, and Pavel is the center of your universe, and everybody's the center of the universe. How can that be? How can the universe be rotating around so many centers? Okay, that's the issue. To understand that a little bit, to have some perception of it, you need to look at reality through a mirror. Not the way that you look from inside out through your eyes, but rather you look at everything, carry a mirror around, and look at everything like this, and you're just another object in the mirror. And you begin to get used to that. And you're just another object. It's no different than all the other objects. That's when you begin to get a sense of the encompassing, the makif, the encircling light, and how everything is equal. So we'll end here today.